I love painting outdoors, but the reality is that most of my paintings are from photographs. And there are some important things you need to remember when you are painting from a photograph. The first thing that you need to think about is to crop your photo. You're never going to take a picture that's going to be exactly perfectly translated into a painting. You're going to need to do some cropping. You don't need to include everything that's in your photograph in your painting. Look at your photograph, think about the thing that attracted you to the scene, and then try to crop that and figure out what is the best way to turn this into a painting. So you want to think about the rule of thirds. If you're not familiar with that, that's when you divide your painting with 2 vertical lines and 2 horizontal lines spaced out evenly, and where those lines intersect is where you want the important parts of your scene to be. And I see this with students a lot. They'll take a very complicated scene and they'll want to paint everything that is in their photograph. But the better approach is to zoom in on a little area of the scene, find the little bit of excitement to you, and crop out the things that aren't important. And the second key is to pay attention to contrast. When you take a photograph, what happens is you're often going to lose information within the light areas of the photograph or the dark areas. In those darks, you lose a lot of detail, sometimes darker in the photograph than they actually are in reality. But if you're looking at that scene in person, your eye is going to be able to see a little bit more detail in the shadows than your camera can. So when you're painting from a photograph, be mindful of how that camera can change your perception of the scene. And the last key is to creatively arrange the elements of your scene. So if you take a look at this reference photo that I'm going to paint from today, over here on the far left, there is a car with headlights. And I wanted to find a way to incorporate that into the scene. I changed the road and I moved that car from the edge of the painting over into a prominent area of the scene. I walk by this house almost every day, and I know that there's not a road right there. And so the temptation is to get really locked in to exactly how the subject is. But what you're doing as an artist is you're taking your cues and your inspiration from the scene or the photograph, and then you have the license as the creator to move things and arrange things to make a better painting. Now that you understand those 3 keys of how to paint from a photograph, I'm going to walk you through the scene that I painted from this photograph and show you step by step how I paint it. After I complete the drawing of my scene, I wet down the back of my paper and the front of my paper, and I lay it flat on my surface. This scene has a very interesting sky, and that's part of the reason that drew me to the scene in the first place. That's why I stopped and snapped this picture. So I'm going to start with the sky and paint the lightest values first and go from there. And I'm dropping in a mixture of cadmium yellow and raw sienna. And as I work away from that light area, I'm using more and more paint on my brush. I don't want to go too light on the other parts of the sky because I want that light to be very bright. So as I move away, I'm adding more and more pigment. I'm using a little bit of raw sienna and rose madder permanent as I get these warm areas of the sky in place, and I'm working wet into wet. And there are some cooler areas in the sky too. I'm adding that up there, and I'm using some lavender and some cobalt blue and a little bit of cerulean for those cooler parts of the sky. Okay, while the paper is still damp, I'm going to lift off a little bit of light areas in the sky. And this is a very subtle thing, but I think it adds something nice when I paint skies. So I'm using a clean, damp brush, and I'm lifting off just a little bit of pigment where the light is catching those clouds. Now, I do need some more value in the sky because, again, I want that light to be really, really bright. This is an Escoda size 18, and it's a synthetic brush, and it doesn't hold a lot of water, but it holds more water and pigment than the smaller version of this brush. While this wash is damp, I'm loading up this brush and I'm dropping in more value. And if I go in there with a fully loaded brush on this very delicate wash and I have too much water and paint on my brush, it's going to flow down the page or bloom and destroy what I've already created. So that's where paint consistency and timing comes into play. My paper is still pretty wet because I did dampen it, and I've already gone over it once with this first layer. So that's why the control here in this part of the painting is very important. Okay, and I'm working through, and I'm adding some lavender and some of those cooler colors as well. And trying to get to that right amount of contrast to really let this sky shine. So that has a pretty good feeling of light. And now I'm going to move in to the ground. And for that, I'm using raw sienna, a little bit of Quinacridone Gold because I want this glowing feeling. And that's a very powerful pigment, so you don't need much of that. And some raw sienna. And I like coming back here when this is all still damp and dropping this in, getting some nice soft edges. And I'm thinking about the light on this car and other areas. And another important thing to remember is the trees and the house and other areas are going to be a lot darker. So things that are darker, I can just paint right through. And I am adding a little soft color of this house, some burnt sienna and some raw sienna, and a little bit of coolness for the window that's here. I used a damp, clean brush and I lifted off a little light ray there. We'll see if that still shows up in the final painting, but I thought that was a nice touch to really give that feeling of light kind of breaking through some clouds. So as I continue to move forward, I lay in value for the road, value for the house. And as I get into the foreground, I'm using more and more pigment. I want to strengthen that up as I get to the bottom of my painting to help push the viewer's attention into the scene. And at the end of my first wash, this is what I'm left with. At this stage, I have all the light values in my painting, the sky is finished, and I'm ready to let this dry and move into the next phase of the painting. The temptation is to leave the ground as the value that it is, but it needs to be stronger in value to really let that light feel strong and bright. So what I'm doing over here is I'm going back over the ground. And this is a mixture of raw sienna, neutral tint, and Cobalt Turquoise. And I do like that soft edge along the horizon. So what I do here is I'm taking a damp, clean brush and I'm softening up that edge and I get that nice seamless transition between the sky and the ground. Now I'm ready to start painting the house. It needs to be pretty dark against that bright sky. And again, the nice thing about painting the light values first is I can leave little areas of light behind. And it adds some complexity and sophistication to the scene that you're painting when you can paint it in this way. And I'm painting around that little cool window, working my way left to right. I had it a little bit darker and a little bit cooler. Here, I want the light to be more vibrant. And so I'm using more raw sienna in the mixture to achieve that warmer color of green. And again, I'm softening the edge. I like that seamless transition between the sky and the horizon. I don't do that in every scene, but I thought it was nice in this painting. And now I'm moving down into the grass in this area, and I'm adding more warmth, more raw sienna into the mix as well. And I'm merging the wash of the grass right into the house that's closer up to us. And I really liked this part of the painting. As the light is kind of shining across the grass, this area here is very important. I don't want to cover all that up. By using more broken marks, I'm adding more texture into the middle ground of the painting. And that's going to help our attention to rest right here in the middle. Notice that I didn't do dry brush all through the background of the scene. I don't want all that texture back there, but I do want it here in the middle ground, in the most important part of my painting. And now I'm going to connect this wash into what's happening in the foreground. And once I do that, this is the middle value shape. I'm going to let this dry and we're going to come in and add the darks into the scene. Okay, my paper has dried and now I'm ready to move in to the darks. And this is an exciting part of the painting, and that is really going to help make the light feel vibrant in the scene when we get that full range of values, all the way from lights through the darks. And those trees are going to help frame that house in a little bit. And also the darks are going to help our truck stand out. Trying to not get too sucked into the fine details, especially in the background of the painting. And as I near the area of the brightest, warmest light, the light is shining through those trees, and I think that's a nice touch to help the light feel powerful. And as I mentioned before, the closer house to us is going to need more value as well, so I'm adding that in now. And I went ahead and connected that house to another shadow in the foreground. I felt like I needed more strength, and I always want to push that viewer's eye into the scene, and so I'm darkening up that shadow here in the foreground. And I'm back over to the truck now, adding in the middle values into that and some of the darks, and that brings a lot more attention to that area. The roads are looking pretty good. I want to put a few little dark lines and define that road a little bit clearer. Giving a little more contrast to this area is going to reinforce this as a main focal area of the scene. And also by connecting those little lines into the truck is more connected into the scene and doesn't feel so isolated and separate. All right, now I'm ready to dry brush some of those trees that are kind of framing in the scene. So I'm using my calligraphy brush here, and I have a very thick mixture of raw sienna, cobalt turquoise, and neutral tint. I'm holding the brush a little further back and using the texture of the paper to give me these nice broken marks. What this does in watercolor is a few things. That texture brings that area forward, but it also creates this lovely contrast in edge between the softness of the sky and that hard, crisp edge. And that's gonna also help create that feeling of depth. And after I use my calligraphy brush, I go back in with a rigger brush to get some more of those fine lines. I wanted the headlights on the truck to be very bright, and those little areas are too difficult to paint around, and so I'm using a touch of white gouache. It's ivory white Holbein gouache is what I use. Any brand for this is fine. It's just a tiny little touch of light that really adds a lot to the scene. And I'm dragging my brush up to get that little sparkle of light that we see on the headlights. I added a little more darks on this house because I felt like it was kind of flat and it needed a little something. And so I added the little fence that was in front of the house and kind of tweaked this a little bit to finish that up. I did a few little dry brush marks to bring the foreground forward, finished up the chimney on the house, and now I'm gonna paint the tree that's over in the top right of the scene to kind of frame in our painting a little bit. And I felt like some of our trees in the background needed a few little marks to kind of organize that area, and a few little marks here. And just like I did with the headlights, I wanted to add a few little highlights around the scene to break up some darks. And so I'm doing the same thing. I have some thick gouache and just touching that up. And here is a look at the final painting. The next time that you're painting from a photograph, think about those tips and remember that you are the creator and you are the artist, and you can move around things and make any changes that you feel like would make a stronger painting. Have you ever been really excited about a painting and you get all set up, you find that right reference that you're excited about, and then it's time to go and you feel lost? You ever had that experience? Well, I have a free resource that I want to give to you today that can help with these problems. My 5 steps to plan a successful watercolor painting. I walk you through the crucial planning phase of your painting that will help you understand what you're going to paint first, second, and third. The planning is really so important, especially in watercolor. This medium is harder to correct. It's so immediate. So having that plan is very important. I send you a PDF that you can download. And the great thing about this is you can have it on your phone, you could print it out, and you can take a look at these crucial planning steps before you start each painting. All you have to do is follow this link here and download my 5-step guide to planning a successful watercolor painting.